God created the shadow, and then he began to split it into pieces. And then those individual shadows that were all made from one shadow began to look at each other, and they didn't know anything except that they were not, and now that they are, okay? And that goes along very much with the theme of Frankenstein, that he's this one being that's created from many beings. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على محمد وآل محمد إلى والمهدينا وسلم تسليما. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. My dear sister and companion Tiffany.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear Father.
Thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me today.
So today I wanted to talk a little bit more about the topic in which we were discussing over the last several episodes, which concerned myths, mythology, the fact that some of the 124,000 prophets and messengers, Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, and we discussed and showcased many times how there are these narrations that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in it identifies Aristotle as a prophet, that his people didn't realize that he was a prophet, right? Mm-hmm. And we said that Imam Ahmad al-Hasan alayhi salam has already identified Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle as prophets that didn't explicitly come out to their people and say we're prophets, but nonetheless they were prophets. And obviously, like our works over the past period, especially in the Hall of Mysteries, has done a lot to kind of prove that idea. And also here, even in our discussions, we've I think showcased beyond a shadow of a doubt to anybody that has a mind or eyes to see that the ideas, the teachings of Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, if you were to actually give somebody a piece of paper and you take one of their quotes or some of their quotes and you say Muhammad said instead of, or Jesus said, they wouldn't be able to tell the difference.
Yeah. Definitely. It's been astonishing, actually, to see how the message, is exactly the same. Even though people do not believe there's a connection between the Greek philosophers and the Abrahamic faiths, it's very clear that there is, and their source of knowledge is one and the same. It's God. Yeah.
And we know that, when we spoke previously about the hadith, where people have like a language of their time, and the language of the time of Socrates and Aristotle and Plato was mythology. That's what was big, wisdom that was hidden in stories, right? Mm-hmm. And we know that for a fact from their teachings that they thought that myth could be a good thing, that it wasn't considered like outright lying, that this is not what it could be. It could be also like stories that embody great virtues, meanings within them that are true, even though the narrative itself might not be a factual historical narrative, but yet the myth itself would be a good myth if it promoted virtue and prohibited vice, and it embodied those same ideals or taught society the same ideals that are those divine ideals that they were promoting throughout their lifetime.
Yeah.
Which kind of, obviously, this is just a side note. It's not really the topic of the conversation today, but it's just interesting to point out that if it is true that Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle were prophets and messengers that came from the same God, and they received divine inspiration from the same God that Moses did, Jesus did, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam did, the Hebrew prophets and messengers did, and then it would, I guess, kind of make it okay or make it permissible that any of those, the Hebrew prophets and messengers, the messenger of Islam, any of them could technically, create a myth, and it would be an okay thing to do, because the purpose of the myth is not to serve as a historical account, but rather to, teach the people that messenger was sent to some particular virtue. And I think still that that's fascinating, especially when the evidence kind of mounts up and pushes us to examine that area, that direction, look a little bit closer. The scientific evidence, because there is no scientific evidence for a lot of things that the Bible claims, be it the flood of Noah, or be it actually the very existence of Moses himself, or the amazing things that took place during his lifetime. There are no historical, archaeological records in ancient Egypt of there ever being like kind of this mass enslavement of the Israelites. There are no records in ancient Egypt of a mass exodus of the Hebrews from ancient Egypt. There's nothing of the sort. And that's why a lot of people kind of deny the existence of Moses. And so it's an interesting idea to put out there. I certainly believe that Moses was a historical figure, you know, and we're going to get into that topic specifically, but I think that it's interesting, especially when we have some of these gospels, like the one that we went over, in which Jesus kind of claims actually that Moses didn't tell the truth. He says in one of these, the Secret Supper of John, he says in there, actually, what Moses wrote about this was false, or Moses didn't tell the truth about that, right? And he kind of, Jesus implies or states that although there was somebody named Moses, and although there were some particular facts concerning particular stories in the Bible, except that it wasn't exactly as Moses had narrated the event. And he refers to a couple different instances, one of them obviously being the incident of the worldwide flood, which science is saying that's impossible, that never happened. This worldwide flood. And Noah, he says, no, it wasn't like that. It was something else. Actually, it was a cloud. It was a group of people. They were not just 8. There were believers from that nation that they were all saved. It was really, it seems to be darkness that was kind of poured over the earth, a flood of ignorance, a flood of darkness, not really like a flood of water. So that's interesting to examine these myths and these stories and to see them and to be able to extract also truths from myths. And we have a lot of modern day myths, a lot of modern day stories that if Socrates and Plato and Aristotle are prophets and they are telling the truth, then we should be able, just as they were able to extract these kind of truths from these old stories, even if they were created by pagans, we should be able to extract today also morals and virtues from modern day stories that are written. And I dare to say we might be able to even extract historical accounts from some of the myths that were written, perhaps not to reflect or to account or give an account of these historical events, but maybe it just happened by default.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's a really fascinating topic, and I never really thought about it in that way. But I mean, as we know, the philosophers, they were prophets of God, and they taught people in this way. So it would make sense if it was happening all along, and the prophets and messengers who came before, who we're more familiar with in the Abrahamic religions, they did the same, and they taught people in this way. And yeah, I mean, now that you bring it up, I think that even the stories that we have, like in the Torah, many people accept that they are most likely allegorical rather than literal, and they're existing in the holy books in order to teach people a lesson, but they didn't happen exactly as it's written. Like, for example, the story in Genesis with Adam and the tree and eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. I think many people accept that that's most likely allegorical. So it would make sense if we have many instances of this in the holy books. And I'm really interested to hear what you have to say about modern myths, because that's something that I'm not really sure what you mean by that.
Yeah, modern myths, I mean like stories that were created now, you know, that were written in our lifetimes or in modern human history, you know, and I think that there is a lot that we can extract from these myths. I think that Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle were correct. I think that nature and religion always influences culture. And so when people are writing, they're subconsciously or consciously drawing from these themes that are already embedded in their psyche. Yeah. And so you can always have a resurrection of these themes. You can find them hidden within, or find these virtues hidden within stories. And I'll give you a couple examples of that. For example, you have the stories that they write in, the scary, spooky stories. Let's go through that today, like these Halloweenish type stories, right? Okay. So you got like the myth of the werewolf, who transforms in the full moon. You also have these stories of the witches, right, that travel in front of the full moon, right, on their broomstick. They're flying across the moon, or they get their most power. They're making the magic during that time period. Well, we know for a fact that some of these stories, like those two, were actually written to be allegorical representations of what takes place with women when they are on their period, right, or on their monthly cycle. Okay. Because most women and people that study women in religion and they'll be able to confirm this. It's because most women have their monthly cycle during the full moon. Yeah. There are Jewish traditions that basically state that a woman is impure during her monthly cycle when she's on her period. There are also Christian and Islamic traditions to the same effect, that a woman that's bleeding is impure and that she shouldn't touch the Quran, for example, during that time, or recite the Quran because she's impure, and the Quran is only touched by those who are pure. So a woman on her period cannot touch that. There's Jewish traditions that they used to, back in the day, build an outhouse, okay? And they used to lock the woman that's on her period. She used to have to go stay in the outhouse, the cabin, outside of the main house when she's on her period, because they believed that anything that a woman touched while she was on her period would become impure.
Yes, okay, yeah. And there's this ritual purification afterwards. I know that's still practiced, right? In Orthodox Judaism, the mikvah, I think they call it. So if a woman is on her period and she sits on a chair, then that chair becomes impure, etc., right? Okay. So she would need to be isolated. We'd have to have the house of impurity in which she would stay in. And they noticed that the moon, the celestial bodies, had an effect on the behaviors of animals. Okay. They made the dogs or the wolves howl, right? Yes. And so they took that and they kind of drew a little bit from that and used it as part of their basis for the story of the werewolf. Okay, because the wolf howls on the full moon, and so the werewolf transforms on the full moon. Yes. So you have this parallel going on. But they also noticed that women, they became moody around their period time. They became emotional. That the moon actually caused most of their daughters, most of their wives, most of the women in their town to go on their period. They believed that the moon had an effect on the period of the blood inside of the body of the woman, in the same way that the full moon had an effect on the tide, right? And so they said to themselves that they created this story about the evil witch, right? Or the normal person, in the case of the werewolf, who would be transformed by the moon, and they would become crazy, emotional, angry, animalistic, etc. Okay, yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah. So when we see this and examine this, we notice that, they're drawing off of human themes, and they're putting it into their stories, their myths. They see something in nature, They consider that to be a historical account. The historical account is that women are transformed during their monthly cycle. There's a change that takes place that they see, that they record. That change is a negative one. It scares them. It's scary, perhaps, for them. And so they embellish that idea and they create around it a story, a false myth. Okay. And later on, the people, if they were to take the myth and they were to believe in it literally, it would be false, right? Because there's no such things as werewolves, for example. But they can withdraw from it certain facts, okay? Which were the underlying basis for the myth itself.
Yes. Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense.
Yeah. So really, today we're going to examine, and this is all just a lead up for us to examine a myth that's probably one of the most famous stories or myths in modern human history. They remake it and remake it and remake it. It was a famous story, a famous book. They make plays out of it. They make cartoons out of it. They make movies out of it. They just made a movie out of it now, recently, which is Frankenstein, the story of Frankenstein.
Okay.
So it's a very popular myth, one of the most famous of our time, I'd say.
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah. It's one of those books that everyone pretty much reads in high school. Yeah.
Yeah. So why don't we go over the story itself? What is the story about? The story of Frankenstein, it basically revolves around a guy. His name is Victor Frankenstein. And Victor Frankenstein is something of a genius. And he basically goes forth and he wants to conquer death. Okay, and he wants to be like a god. And so he goes forth taking parts of dead people from the graves and he sews them together. And he manages, the scientist manages, through the use of lightning and through the use of other things, he manages to imbue this mesh of dead corpses, right? He manages to give it life, okay? There are many of them. He makes out of them one. And he manages to bring it to life. Now, the corpse, when it comes to life, it becomes dangerous and it actually becomes a threat. It's very powerful. It's very strong. You know, Frankenstein regrets that he actually makes it. Okay. And for some reason, there becomes this also confusion between the names, where Frankenstein becomes the name of the monster, even though it's the name of the guy actually who made Frankenstein, who oddly enough, he never names Frankenstein. He never gives it a name. You know, so you have this nameless monster that's kind of wandering around, and now it's obsessed. It has this love-hate relationship with its master. It perceives itself as having been abused by its creator, and it's angry, and it becomes threatening. And Frankenstein regrets that he makes it, and he wants to put an end to Frankenstein. That's the story in a nutshell. I don't think we need to go into too many more details concerning the story, because I think everybody, for the most part, that's alive today on the planet is probably familiar with this myth in one way, shape, or form.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
But what I think is like super interesting is how people take this story and they use it to warn us of the future. They want to warn us about the dangers of AI. That AI, for example, could become the next monster, the next Frankenstein, right? That is going to get out of control, that might turn against us and pose a threat to mankind, right? Yes. And that the Frankenstein, we can see truth in that, we can see future in it, in the sense that it is this a collection of corpses, right? And in the same way that AI is drawing off of all of the different information that's uploaded to it by all of these different people around the world that have uploaded their lives onto the internet, or their theories or their works off the internet, or their whatever it is. So then the AI basically studies all of that, collects and compiles all of that, and it acts as one being that was made from all of these different people's input.
Yes. Yeah. I see the parallel. It's very clear. And also humans are the ones who gave birth to this idea, right? They are the ones who created the AI. But then the concern is that the AI would then take on a life of its own, and then we wouldn't be able to control it anymore.
Exactly.
Frankenstein's monster.
Frankenstein's monster, the artificial intelligence, because that's what it was, right? It was artificially made, and he was intelligent to some degree, more intelligent than the animals anyway. So that's the thing. But I don't think that that's the be-all and end-all of the story. I don't think that it is actually so much a story that is prophesying the future than it is a myth that is telling us about the past. I think that Frankenstein is actually a retelling, it's a creation myth. It's a retelling of ancient events that took place that's embedded in the human psyche from a long, long time ago, something that was embedded in our souls. It's the ancient story of our very creation. That's what I think. And I think that when we hold it up to some of the stories that we have, especially from Muhammad and the family of Muhammad, we're going to find something very interesting between the two of them. We have this hadith in which God, when he first creates creation, right, that he desires to pose a question to it, almost as if to check if it's conscious or not. Right? To test how smart it is, to see if God's creation or God's experiment actually went in the right way. And so he approaches the monster, right? Mm-hmm. Just in the same way that Frankenstein approached his monster. And he asks, he says, who am I? That's the first question. Who am I? Do you recognize, are you smart enough to tell that I created you? Because here I am, I'm in existence. You're not. So he asks, who am I? And the very first response from creation back to God, according to the hadith, is, who am I? Okay. So now you have the creation of a creature. It's intelligent, but it's repeating God's words in the same way that the monster was repeating Victor Frankenstein's words, right? Yes. Remember, even in the movie, Victor Frankenstein tries to tell the monster, my name is Victor, and he keeps saying the same thing. He's repeating himself. Instead of recognizing that his name is Victor, he thinks that his own name is Victor, right? Yeah. He keeps calling himself Victor. And we find this theme repeating itself. In the book Al-Kitab, you have God asking Satan the very same question. He asks him, he says, who am I? And Satan says, you're a God and I'm a God. Yeah. Okay? So he's unable to distinguish between God and himself. Yeah. And he's more concerned with his own self. Yeah. Okay? So Azazel, or Iblis, the creation of God, who was made in his image, lent his light in the narrative of Al-Kitab, was creating many different things, became a danger, all right, a threat. Mm-hmm. God had to exile him and this entire being, which oddly enough in another book, Al-Hafta Sharif, when describing the very creation of creation, it says that God created the shadow and then he began to split it into pieces. And then those individual shadows that were all made from one shadow began to look at each other, and they didn't know anything except that they were not and now that they are. Okay. And that goes along very much with the theme of Frankenstein, that he is this one being that's created from many beings. The same thing is taking place here. You have this one being that actually is broken down into many beings. Yes. Okay. And the one collective being, which is creation, ends up being something that God regrets, according to the Old Testament, right? He regretted that he made them.
Yeah.
Okay, in the time of Noah, Genesis, he regrets that he makes them. In Al-Kitab also, he doesn't say that he regrets that he makes them, but he ends up pushing them into a new realm, away from him.
Okay.
They become veiled from God, right? Yeah. Just like Victor Frankenstein banished or exiled his monster, just like God exiled Adam and Eve from the garden. There's this separation that takes place between the two of them. Frankenstein is left to wander the earth, right? Trying to figure out his miserable existence. Yeah. Same thing with creation in all of these stories. Kitab, Al-Hafti Sharif, the Bible, the creation is aggressive. Creation is arrogant. Creation is not behaving in the way that God had intended for it to behave when he first created it. And so they have to be exiled and left to wander around for a while by themselves.
This is so interesting. Yeah. I mean, it never would have crossed my mind that but the parallels are very obvious when you explain it like this. You're absolutely right. And it reminds me also of the hadiths that say that God never looked at creation again right after he created it. Like we're sort of left on our own, and there's this clear distance between us and God. And
exactly.
Yeah.
And in the book, Victor Frankenstein, he ends up having to escape because the monster is chasing him down. The monster is hunting him down. The monster seeks to kill him. And we have the exact same thing. And the monster considers itself to be stronger than him. Yeah. The same thing is taking place in the stories of the Bible. Yeah. Creation comes back together as one entity. They sew themselves together in the time of Abraham. In the time of Nimrod, they build the Tower of Babel. Yes. Okay. And they unite and they speak one language. And God says in the Bible that now they're cooperating. And if they continue to cooperate like this, they can accomplish all things. Yeah. And they're seeking to reach the heavens. They're obsessed with finding their creator and fighting their creator. Yeah. 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 And Nimrod goes up on top of the tower at some point and declares his own godhood according to the narrations. And he takes his bows and arrows and his weapons and he points them towards the heavens and he shoots his arrows in an attempt to kill his creator or the God of Abraham. Yeah. Right. And the heavenly host. And actually the God causes the arrows to come back down with blood. And he thinks that he actually killed God. Right, and he declares himself to be victorious. And so this is the story of Frankenstein. This is the story of Frankenstein, one entity creation that can be broken down. It's a schizophrenic character, right? This creature that it was not named initially by God. God never names this initial creation according to the sources, at least that we have. He didn't name creation when he first created them in the sense of in the stage of when he created them as one shadow, and they end up being broken down, and they're seeking to fight God, and this repeats itself over and over again, and it repeats itself also in the time of Moses. You have this tyrannical Pharaoh who's enslaving everybody, and they're working towards one cause, and he's building these great structures and these great cities, and he's saying, do you not see the Nile River flowing in between my feet here? I mean, is there any other God other than me? I'm your high God, right? Yes. I am Pharaoh. I'm the God of everybody. I'm the God of all creation. So you have this Frankenstein monster that keeps rearing its ugly head in the form of Nimrod, in the form of Pharaoh, in the form of Abu Bakr and Umar, in the form of Pontius Pilate, or the rabbis, the evil institutions, the evil leaders, the evil tyrants that are in place.
And more disturbingly, those who form themselves as a body with those individuals acting as the head, right?
Exactly.
I mean, ultimately society And humanity has the potential to be one giant Frankenstein's monster.
Yeah. And the religious institutions too, right? And that's what keeps happening, is that God keeps sending a messenger down to create a church, to create a congregation, to create a religion or a path. And this religion ends up being hijacked. And the rabbis, the Pharisees, they end up wanting to fight against their Lord, right? And in Christianity, they actually killed God, right?
Yeah, they did. Yeah, of course. It's shocking.
So they're victorious in the end. And so this myth of Frankenstein, if read correctly, we can extract a lot of truth from it. Because it's a story of our past, and it's a story of a warning concerning our future, so that it may not repeat itself.
Wow. I mean, yeah, it's a story, as you said, that we've seen, repeating throughout history. And it's not the cautionary tale that everyone thinks it is, right? It's not a cautionary tale against something like AI. It's something much more serious than that. It's a story of humanity and their relationship with God. And yeah, I think that it's a much more important story than we ever realized.
It really is. And I think that the key is there, the solution is there. And that is that although maybe in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the monster itself didn't have the proper intelligence or ability to behave itself or to calm itself down enough so that Victor may establish a relationship with it, I think that we as human beings do. And I think that as long as we are behaving like monsters, killing one another, threatening the planet, threatening all other species on the planet, so long as we are arrogant or proclaiming ourselves to be God, we will never meet and have a decent conversation with our Creator, because He wants to have nothing to do with us. But if we can cease to behave like the monster in Frankenstein and behave more like Victor himself, perhaps our Creator will come out from behind the curtain, will come out. Perhaps He's in the forest somewhere. He's on top of a hill. He's in the skies somewhere, keeping an eye on us. And when He sees us behaving in a civil manner with one another and with our own selves, when He sees us putting on some clothes and learning how to speak, when He sees us embodying some of the divine virtues and qualities, then He will establish communication once again. And maybe then and only then will we come out of the wilderness and the exile.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, the choice is in our hands, right? Like, if we want to be true human beings as God intended us to be, or we want to continue to be, this monstrous creation, the choice is really ours. And this is the choice that leads to God's presence in the world and God's presence in our lives, really.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Tiffany. God bless you.
Thank you so much, Father. This was a really interesting episode.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
That was such an interesting episode. My mind is blown by what Abba Sadiq taught us today. And it made me think about my own upbringing as a Christian, what he said today and what he reminded us of, that Socrates said, it doesn't matter whether a myth is historically accurate, what matters is the virtue. It reminded me of the teachings of Jesus and what's written in the Bible. Jesus, He spoke in parables in order to teach the people in a way that they would understand it. And what is a parable if not a myth? And this series has the power to open the door to talk about many things. I mean, in today's day and age, people might be more familiar with the movie The Matrix than they are with Plato's allegory of the cave. But they might not be aware of the significance of that story and how it has a tie and a connection to the message of the prophets and the messengers and the people who God sent in order to teach mankind throughout history. So I think that this is going to be an incredible series, and I'm really excited about what we learned today. And I hope that you stay tuned and keep learning with us on the School of Divine Mysteries.